Kingsport Heights breathed out the night in a sigh of salt and diesel. The rain was a fine, cold mist, blurring the edges of the city, making the neon signs of the Port District bleed watery colors onto the wet asphalt. Red from the Mariner's Last Call, blue from the bail bonds office, and the weak, warm yellow of juniper and soot. The diner stood as a small outpost of light against the vast, dark heave of the Atlantic, smelling of burnt coffee and old frying oil. Inside, Rowan Hale moved through the late shift. At 29, she felt older, worn smooth in places by the friction of her life. She was a single mother, which was just a polite way of saying she was the beginning and end of everything for the small boy sitting in the staff booth near the kitchen. Eli Hale, 7 years old, was meticulously coloring. His homework was finished, stacked neatly at the edge of the Formica table. He was a polite child, too quiet perhaps, fascinated by the massive container ships that slid past the harbor lights. His pencil, gripped in a small, determined hand, was sketching a tugboat, brave against a sea of scribbled waves. The bell above the diner door didn't just tinkle, it announced. The shift in atmosphere was instant. The low murmur of the dock workers at the counter died. Forks paused. Rain-slicked black sedans, 3 of them had materialized at the curb, their engines a low, expensive purr that cut through the sound of the rain. The men who entered first were large, their dark suits straining across shoulders that seemed built for blocking doorways. They scanned the room, their eyes flat and assessing, dismissing the other patrons as furniture. Then their leader stepped inside. Darius Valente was 38 years old. The financial papers called him a reclusive billionaire, the head of the Valente Consortium. The whispers in the dark alleys of Kingsport Heights called him the Don. He wore a cashmere overcoat that had probably cost more than the diner's monthly earnings. Raindrops glistened on the shoulders, and he brushed them off with an air of impatient calm. He didn't look dangerous in the way his men did. He looked inevitable. They took the largest booth in the corner. Rowan picked up menus, her heart a dull thud against her ribs. Everyone knew who he was. "Coffee," Darius Valente said to the air. His voice was a low baritone, rough at the edges like high-quality whiskey. Rowan nodded, pouring, her hands steady by sheer force of will. It happened as she was returning with the coffee pot. Eli, finished with his drawing, slipped out of his booth. He wanted to show his mother the tugboat before he packed up his crayons. He navigated the narrow aisle, his eyes on Rowan. One of Darius's men, younger and eager to impress, had slung his jacket over the back of the chair. A heavy wallet, thick with cards, was half exposed in an inner pocket. As Eli passed, his small sneaker brushed the leg of the chair. The subordinate's reaction was instant and violent. "Hey!" his voice cracked through the diner. "Kid, get your hands off that!" Eli froze, his eyes wide with terror, the drawing crushing in his small fist. He hadn't even seen the wallet. Rowan stopped, the coffee pot hot in her hand. Darius Valente didn't look at the boy. He merely glanced at his subordinate, annoyed by the disturbance. He picked up a menu, his voice laced with a cold, dismissive irony. "Teach your son not to steal, lady." The words hit Rowan harder than a physical blow. She saw Eli flinch, his face crumpling. The sight of her child, accused and terrified, extinguished every bit of fear she had. It ignited something else, something primal and white-hot. She moved before she thought. She put the coffee pot down on the counter with a quiet click. The sound that came next was not quiet. It was the sharp, shocking crack of a palm connecting with a cheek. The sound echoed, absolute, in the suddenly dead-silent diner. Rowan Hale, her chest heaving, stood inches from the billionaire. Her handprint, white then flushing to a furious red, marked Darius Valente's face. The 2 bodyguards were on their feet, hands inside their jackets. The subordinate who had yelled was pale, his mouth open. Rowan ignored them all. Her gaze was locked on Darius. His eyes, dark and unreadable, showed only a flicker of shock. You will apologize, Rowan whispered, her voice shaking but carrying the force of a gale. Not to me. You will apologize to my son. The air was so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. A cook in the back peeked through the service window, his face ashen. Darius Valente raised one hand slowly. His men tensed. He didn't touch Rowan. He touched his own cheek, where her fingers had left their mark. He turned his head, feeling the sting. Then he looked back at her. He saw no calculation. He saw no strategy. He saw only a mother's defense. "Sit down," he ordered his men. His voice was quiet, but the command was steel. They sat, though their eyes never left Rowan. Darius turned from her and walked the few steps to where Eli stood, frozen, by the kitchen door. The Don crouched, a movement that seemed unnatural in his expensive suit, bringing himself down to the 7-year-old's eye level. The entire diner seemed to lean in, many diners now discreetly filming with their phones. "I am sorry," Darius Valente said. His voice was different now, softer. "My man was wrong to startle you, and I was wrong to accuse you." Eli just stared, tears welling. Darius pointed to the crumpled paper in Eli's hand. "What did you draw?" Eli's lower lip trembled. He slowly uncurled his fist and held out the drawing of the tugboat. Darius studied it. A tugboat. They do the hard work. He nodded once, a gesture of respect. Then he stood. He walked back to his booth. He drank the coffee Rowan's shaking hand had poured. His men said nothing. The diner slowly, nervously, came back to life, though it was a life of whispers. By the time they left, the video clip was already pinging across local social media. Waitress slaps Valente. It was grainy, shot from a phone, but the sound of the slap was unmistakable. Darius stopped at the register where Rowan was ringing up another customer. He placed a black, heavy credit card on the counter. It was made of metal. "The boy is brave," Darius said, his voice low, intended only for her. The red mark on his cheek had faded to a dull, angry flush. "As for you, you owe me a conversation." He turned and walked out into the rain. Hours later, Rowan locked the front door of the Juniper and Soot. She held Eli's hand as they walked the dark, quiet blocks to their apartment. The air felt charged, expectant. Across the street, parked deep in the shadow of a derelict warehouse, a dark sedan sat with its lights off. A figure inside raised a long-lens camera. A flash, too quick to be noticed, illuminated the mother and son for a fraction of a second. The camera clicked, capturing their image. The driver watched them turn the corner, then put the car in gear. The morning light over Kingsport Heights failed to burn away the residue of the previous night. By the time Rowan arrived for her shift, the Juniper and Soot felt different, contaminated by the digital glare of overnight fame. Her boss, Sal, was wiping down a clean counter, his movements jerky. "Rowan, we got visitors." 2 men in gray, rumpled suits sat at the counter, their coffee untouched. They weren't cops, not the local beat. They had the weary, institutional look of government bureaucracy. "Ma'am," the older one said, flashing a badge so quickly it was just a glint of metal. "Bureau of Civic Security Oversight. We're reviewing an incident involving Darius Valente, the one on the internet." They weren't asking about her. They were asking about him. How many men did he threaten her? Did he say anything about the docks, the consortium, anything? Rowan gave them nothing. It was a misunderstanding. He apologized to my son. The agents exchanged a look of deep, professional skepticism. "A misunderstanding," the younger one repeated. "You slapped the Don of Kingsport Heights, and he apologized." "Right." "It's the truth," Rowan said, her jaw tight. When they finally left, Sal slumped against the register. They weren't the only ones. Rope. He held up a piece of paper. A note slipped under the door sometime before dawn. The letters were cut from newspapers. "Stop sheltering the Hales." "This isn't just a video." "Rowan," Sal pleaded. "This is them, the other ones, the Raptor Syndicate. They hate Valente. You kicked the nest." The bell on the door jingled, silencing him. Darius Valente stepped inside. It was just past 2 in the afternoon, the dead lull between lunch and dinner. He wore a simple gray Henley and dark trousers, looking less like a Don and more like a man, yet the aura of compressed power remained. He ignored Sal and looked only at Rowan. "We need to talk," he said. He'd seen the note on the counter. He didn't need to read it. He knew the signature. "I have a contract here," he said, placing a slim folder on the counter. "Security, a relocation, full expenses. It's for you and your son." Rowan stared at the folder, then at him. "A contract," she said, her voice flat. "You mean patronage? You mean you buy my silence and put me in a cage you own?" His eyes hardened slightly. "I mean, I made a mistake, and it put you in the line of fire. I am offering a way out of it." "I don't want your protection," she said, the words sharp with pride. "I don't want your money. I want you to leave us alone." "Do you think they will?" He gestured toward the note. "The video made you a target. They think you're my weakness or my property. They will use you to provoke me." She recoiled at the word property. "I'm not your property," she spat. "No," he agreed, his voice quiet. "You are not, but the Raptors don't care about the distinction. I made this error. I will correct it." "You can't correct this with bodyguards. You correct it by staying away." She paused, her gaze softening slightly as she thought of her son. "But Eli, he's confused. He heard the men at the diner. He heard the agents this morning." Darius understood. "The park, by the water, tomorrow. I will speak to him again, not as a Don, as the man who was wrong." Rowan agreed to that. One meeting. For Eli. The small harbor park was windswept and empty. Darius sat on the bench. Not Eli. He pointed out the different flags on the container ships. He asked Eli about his tugboat drawing. He listened. Truly listened. As Eli explained the difference between a harbor tug and an ocean-going tug, he never once spoke down to the 7-year-old. He just talked, man to man. And he apologized again, this time for the noise and the fear. By the time they left, Eli had a small, rare smile. He knows a lot about boats, Mom. Rowan felt a sliver of cautious relief. Maybe this was the end of it. That relief lasted until the drive home. Her old sedan rattled as she took the exit toward their apartment. A dark, nondescript car pulled in behind her. It stayed there. She changed lanes. The car changed lanes. She slowed down. The car slowed, maintaining the exact distance. Rowan's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. She made a sudden, unplanned right turn onto a side street. The car followed without hesitation. "Mom," Eli asked, sensing the tension. "It's okay, honey, just buckle tight." The car behind her suddenly accelerated, bumping her rear fender. It wasn't hard, just a metallic threat. Rowan screamed, fighting the wheel. A black Mercedes, seemingly from nowhere, shot out of an adjacent alley, cutting off the sedan with geometric precision. There was no crash, just a perfect, calculated block. The sedan slammed on its brakes, swerving. One of Darius's men, the one from the diner, stepped out of the Mercedes. He didn't draw a weapon, he just walked to the sedan's window and spoke. Rowan couldn't hear the words. The dark sedan reversed, tires smoking, and fled. Moments later, the Mercedes idled next to her open window. Darius was in the passenger seat. He looked at Rowan, then at Eli, his gaze sweeping them for any sign of harm. "The Raptors," he said. It wasn't a question. He knew. "They are using the clip to force my hand, to make me show my defenses." He looked at her, his face grim. "This is no longer a request. You cannot go home." The apartment was not a penthouse. It was in a clean, secure, anonymous building in a neighborhood that hadn't yet been gentrified. One of the buildings secretly managed by the Valente Community Fund. It was furnished with sterile, beige furniture. It was a safe house. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He hated the new sounds, the smell of fresh paint, the absence of the foghorns. He sat in the strange bed, crying quietly. Rowan tried everything. She sang, she read, she held him. But her own fear was a frequency he could feel. and it made him worse. She felt the sharp, cold sting of helplessness. There was a soft knock. Rowan tensed. She checked the peephole. It was Darius. She opened the door. "What do you want?" He just looked past her to the bedroom, where Eli was trying to stifle his sobs. "He's afraid of the new place." Darius walked past her. He didn't turn on the light. He just sat on the edge of the small bed. "I used to be afraid of the thunder," Darius said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. Eli's crying quieted to a sniffle. "I thought the sky was breaking," Darius continued, staring at the wall. "My older sister. She told me it was just the world shifting, making room. She said you couldn't be afraid of the noise if you knew it was just making space for the quiet to come back." He kept talking, his voice a steady, calm drone, telling a half-remembered story about a boat that crossed the ocean. He didn't pat Eli. He just spoke, filling the room with his presence until there was no space left for fear. After 10 minutes, Eli's breathing was deep and even. He was asleep. Rowan stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching the man who controlled the city's underworld lull her child to sleep. Darius stood up slowly. He walked into the small living room. He looked exhausted, the skin under his eyes dark. The armor was back in place, but she had seen the crack. He looked at her, his gaze heavy, lost in a memory she couldn't access. He moved to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. His voice was a rasp, so low she barely heard it, a wound forced open. "Stay until I fall asleep." He didn't look back as he said it. It wasn't a request. It was an echo, a fragment of some old pain, startled from its hiding place. Then he was gone, and the heavy-duty lock clicked shut, leaving Rowan and her sleeping son secure in the silence. The cage, Rowan discovered, was comfortable, but it was still a cage. She'd refused his money, refused the passive role of a protected victim, so Darius had offered a compromise, a job. The Harbor Table was one of the Valente Community Fund's flagship charities, a high-end soup kitchen that served the working poor of the Port District. Rowan, with her restaurant experience, was overqualified. She took the position as night manager. It was a trade. She worked for her independence, and in return, the building and her route to and from the apartment were under the 24/7 invisible surveillance of his organization. A black sedan was always parked a block away. A man named Marco, polite and built like a vending machine, was always visiting the building lobby when she and Eli left. She was safe. She was also a prisoner. Darius himself was an infrequent, disruptive presence. She'd see him from the kitchen service window, watching a youth baseball team in the park across the street. He'd funded the entire league, from the AstroTurf to the Bats. He stood apart, stiff in his tailored suit, watching the children play with a profound, unreadable hunger. He came by the kitchen late one afternoon, citing a security review. He found Rowan in the small office, cross-referencing inventory sheets. "The new steel doors are secure," he said, his presence filling the tiny room. "Good," she replied, not looking up. "The neighborhood patrol has increased by 30%. It's safer." Rowan put her pen down. She finally met his gaze. The air was heavy with the smell of baking bread and the faint, metallic scent of his cologne. "Is it safer, Darius, or is it just quieter?" He frowned. "There's a difference." "Everything," she said, leaning forward. "Quiet is what happens when people are too afraid to make noise. Safe is what happens when they don't have to be. Are you buying peace, or are you building it?" The question settled between them, unanswered. He stared at her, a flicker of something annoyance, respect in his dark eyes. He was a man who dealt in absolutes. She had just handed him a nuance he couldn't control. The answer came 3 nights later. It started not with a bang, but with a smell. Acrid chemical smoke, not the familiar scent of burnt toast. It was coming from the dry storage pantry. Rowan moved fast, pulling the alarm and shoving the 2 volunteers toward the exit. "It's arson," she yelled. "A small fire. Someone threw something through the vent." By the time Darius's car screeched to a halt on the curb, the small fire was out. but the chemical extinguisher foam covered the boxes. The real crisis was the walk-in refrigerators. "The fire department cut the power to the block," she told him. Her face smudged with soot, her voice all business. "I have thousands of dollars in perishables, meat and dairy that will spoil in 2 hours. This is a week's worth of meals for the community." Darius didn't hesitate. He looked at her, then at the kitchen, then back at her. He saw a general, not a victim. He pulled out his phone. "I need a refrigerated truck at the harbor table," he said to the person on the other end. "Not in an hour. In 10 minutes. Exactly 10 minutes later, a massive, unmarked 19-wheeler from the Valente logistics fleet backed into the alley. Rowan, Darius, and the 2 volunteers formed a line, transferring crates of food in the flashing red and blue lights of the fire trucks. They worked as a team, a silent, efficient machine. The next day, Eli approached Darius in the apartment lobby. The boy was shy, but the terror he'd felt in the diner was gone, replaced by a child's curiosity. He held out a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you." Darius unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing, a small, powerful tugboat, not unlike the one Eli had drawn at the diner, was pulling a bright yellow circle, a lantern, through a sea of gray and black fog. On the side of the tugboat, Eli had carefully written, "Valente." Darius stared at the drawing for a long time, his throat tight. He looked at Eli, a tugboat, pulling a light through the fog. "To show the way," Eli whispered. Darius nodded, his expression uncharacteristically soft. He carefully folded the drawing and put it in his breast pocket, over his heart. The fire had been a warning from the Raptor Syndicate. Darius knew it, and now he knew Rowan had to know it all. That night, he brought a laptop to her apartment. "This is what they're doing," he said, pulling up a map of Kingsport Heights. It was color-coded with zoning permits and shell corporations. "Raptor isn't just a gang. It's a development firm. They're laundering money by force gentrifying the port." He pointed to the block where the harbor table stood. "They want this land. The fire wasn't just to warn me. It was to scare you and the community out." Rowan saw it then, the scope of it. This wasn't just about a slap in a diner. It was about the entire city. "What about Eli?" she whispered. "His school is 3 blocks from there." They met with the principal the next morning. Darius, all quiet charisma and tailored suit, introduced a new, privately funded initiative, the Neighborhood Shield Program. The school, underfunded and grateful, agreed immediately. The program meant that Eli's teacher had a panic button linked directly to Darius's security. It meant that Rowan and Eli established a safety protocol. "If anyone, and I mean anyone, tries to pick you up," Rowan instructed him, her hands on his small shoulders, "and they don't know the safety word, what do you do?" "I ask them what Mom's favorite boat is," Eli recited. "And if they get it wrong, I scream fire, not help, and I run." They returned to the apartment building that evening, the weight of the day pressing down on them. They stood in the hallway outside her door, the air dim and quiet. "He's a smart boy," Darius said, his voice low. "He has to be," Rowan replied, exhausted. They just stood there for a beat. The proximity was stifling. He smelled like wool, rain, and power. She smelled like soap and the lingering, faint trace of smoke from the fire. He lifted his hand. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He didn't touch her face. He didn't reach for her waist. He lightly, tentatively, brushed the back of his fingers against her forearm. It was just skin on skin, but it felt like a jolt of electricity, a question. Rowan didn't pull away. Her breath hitched, and she leaned into the touch, a magnetic, millimeter-long shift. Darius's eyes darkened. He saw the acceptance. He saw the vulnerability. His fingers tensed, wanting to grip, to pull her closer. The chemistry between them was a tangible, simmering thing. And then, with a control that was visibly painful, he pulled his hand back. He balled it into a fist at his side. "They'll be watching," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. It wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that he respected her, and this cage was of his making. "Good night, Rowan." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy, leaving her alone in the hallway with the phantom heat of his touch still burning on her skin. The silence of the safe house was a heavy blanket, and under it, Rowan's past began to stir. This new, enforced stillness gave her too much time to think. She wasn't just a waitress who had stumbled into a dangerous man's life. Years ago, she'd been an apprentice chef in one of Boston's most demanding kitchens, a rising star with a sharp palate and a sharper ambition. Then had come Jace Morrow, with his quick charm and quicker hands, dipping into the wrong pockets. Then had come Eli. Jace had evaporated 2 months before their son was born, leaving a string of gambling debts and a note that wasn't even an apology. Rowan had fled to Kingsport Heights, trading her chef's whites for a diner apron, burying her past to protect her son's future. The past found her on a Tuesday, outside the harbor table as she was leaving her shift. "Rowan," a voice said, dredging up 6 years of buried history. She froze. Jace Morrow looked worse. Thinner, his eyes watery and constantly darting. He was a man living on the frayed edges of his nerves. "You look good," he said, his smile failing to reach his eyes. "Heard you're living well. Running with the big man, huh, Valente? What do you want, Jace?" "I'm a father. I got it right. I want to see him. I want to see Eli." "You have no rights," she said, her voice a low, cold fury. "You have nothing. You left." "Yeah, well, people can change. And my new friends, they're big on family." He leaned in, his cheap cologne washing over her. "The Raptors. They just want a little information. What's Valente's next move on the Port A schedule? A name. Just help me out, and I can be a real father. You don't... Well, they know where he goes to school." The threat was clear, wrapped in the pathetic guise of paternal rights. He wanted her to be his informant. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked back to the apartment, her rage a cold, hard stone in her stomach. She told Darius immediately. His reaction was terrifying in its stillness. He didn't punch a wall. He didn't raise his voice. His face became a perfectly smooth, cold mask. "Jace Morrow," he said, the name of a file being closed. "He's a bookie. Runs small bets for a Raptor-owned front on the east side." He took out his phone. "He is a loose end. I will have him removed." "Removed?" Rowan stepped between him and the door, her hands fisted at her sides. "What does that mean? What do your men do? Does removed mean he disappears?" "It means," Darius said, his voice dangerously soft, "that he will not threaten you, or your son, again." "No." The word was absolute. "You don't get to handle this. You don't get to clean up my past with your dirty methods. Eli deserves a life that isn't built on a foundation of your violence. If you do that, if you make him disappear, you are no different from them." The accusation hung in the air, sharp as glass. He turned away from her, a violent flinch, and walked to the window. He stared at the city lights, his back a rigid wall of bespoke wool. "No different." His voice was a low growl. "A year ago, the Raptors put a bomb in a car. It was meant for me. But my sister? She was an architect. She was designing a community center for the port. She borrowed my car because hers was in the shop." He paused. The silence was heavier than any sound. "They are not the same," he finally said, his voice raw. "They destroy. They burn. I hold the line." He turned to face her, and the mask was gone. In its place was a profound, echoing grief. "I haven't slept through the night since it happened. That is the difference." He left her with that confession, a piece of shrapnel he had finally dislodged, leaving her to process the weight of his war. The next day, a different kind of pressure arrived. A woman in a sensible pantsuit intercepted her in the park while Eli was playing. "Rowan Hale, I'm Inspector Corin Voss, BCSO." She was all business. "We know about Jace Morrow. We know the Raptors are using him to leverage you." Rowan felt the trap closing. "We don't care about Valente's social life," Voss said, clipping her words. "We care about the Raptors and their port development scheme. Morrow has outstanding warrants in 3 states for wire fraud. We can make those warrants go away. We can give him a clean slate and a one-way bus ticket to Seattle. He loses his leverage. You lose your problem. All you have to do is tell us what he asks. And what you hear. Help us take the Raptors down, legally. Rowan was now standing on a knife's edge. Jace wanted her to spy on Darius. Voss wanted her to spy for the BCSO. And Darius wanted to erase the problem, an act that would stain her and Eli's future forever. It was Darius who offered the next move. The Valente Fund is hosting its annual Clean Port auction, he told her. It's public, high profile. The Raptors will be there, listening. I want you and Eli to come, as my guests. To what, she asked. To be bait. To be seen, he corrected. They're using you as a weapon. I'm showing them it doesn't frighten me. The auction was held in a glass-walled atrium overlooking the harbor. Soft jazz drifted through the air. The elite of Kingsport Heights were dressed in tuxedos and jewels. Rowan had used her first paycheck from the harbor table to buy a simple, floor-length dark green dress from a consignment shop. She walked in, holding Eli's hand. Darius was in the middle of a conversation with the mayor. He turned, and he simply stopped. The mayor, the music, the room, it all vanished for him. He had seen her defiant, angry, and soot-stained. He had never seen her like this. She wasn't just beautiful. She was serene, a column of strength that needed no adornment. Later, while Eli was in a corner, mesmerized by a dessert buffet and watched by a discreet guard, the band began a slow, instrumental piece. Darius appeared at her elbow. One dance. She didn't protest. She let him lead her to the floor. He didn't pull her into a cinematic embrace. He simply placed one hand on the small of her back. The heat of his palm was a shock, a searing brand through the thin material of her dress. Her hand went to his shoulder, and she could feel the hard, controlled muscle beneath the suit. They barely moved. It was less a dance and more a public alignment. His thumb brushed, just once, against her spine. An electric current, sharp and undeniable, raced from that single point up her neck, making her shiver. She met his gaze. His eyes were dark, fixed on her, and in them, she saw the same hunger she'd seen when he watched the children play baseball, a deep, profound need. The air crackled, a silent, slow-burning admission in the middle of a room full of enemies. The dance was a brief, charged truce, but the war was waiting just outside the bubble of the music. It ended abruptly. A fire alarm, shrill and insistent, split the air. The crowd, a mix of old money and new power, reacted with a predictable, high-pitched panic. "It's a false alarm," Darius said, his hand still on her back, his voice calm. He was scanning the room, not for the fire, but for the threat, a distraction. His men were already moving, creating a wedge, guiding him and Rowan toward a service exit. But the distraction wasn't the alarm. It was the reporters who suddenly materialized, blocking their path, their phones out and recording. "Miss Hale, is it true you're living in a Valente-owned property? Did you slap Mr. Valente to get his attention? Are you his mistress?" The questions were a barrage of flash-lit venom. Rowan recoiled, stunned. Darius's face was arctic. "Move," he commanded, and his men physically shielded her, pushing through the small, aggressive crowd. "Get her to the car. Take the south elevator to the garage. I'll meet you," Darius ordered his main guard, Marco. "Get Eli first." "He's already in the car, sir. We moved him when the alarm pulled," Marco said. Rowan's heart seized. She was separated from Darius in the chaos, hustled by Marco into the concrete chill of the parking garage. The designated car was running. Eli safe in the back with another guard. Marco opened the driver's door for her. The plan had been for her to drive, to look like a normal departure. "I'll be right behind you," Marco said, "but I have to secure the exit. Lock the doors." Rowan slid in, her hands shaking. She locked the doors. The car was a pool of silence after the atrium. "Mom," Eli asked, his voice small from the back. "It's okay, baby, just a silly alarm." She jammed the key into the ignition. Before she could turn it, The back door on the driver's side was yanked open. It wasn't Marco. Jace Morrow slid into the back seat, his eyes wild, reeking of sweat and fear. The guard who was supposed to be with Eli was gone, probably pulled away by a secondary diversion. "Jace!" Rowan screamed. "Shut up," he hissed, his voice cracking. "Just drive. They said just to talk to you. They said, 'Get out of my car!'" "You're not listening," he half sobbed, leaning forward, his face inches from hers. "They're not messing around. Rowan, the Raptors, they'll hurt me. But they said if you don't listen, if you don't do what I say, they will take the boy." Eli let out a small, terrified whimper. That was all. That was the line. Rowan's vision went red. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She unbuckled her seatbelt, turned and reached for his face. Her fingers hooked like claws. "Don't you ever—" The passenger door opened. Darius Valente didn't get in. He simply stood there, a figure of absolute, cold authority. He had seen Jace enter from the security feed. Jace froze, his hand in the air. He looked from Rowan's fury to Darius's calm, and he broke. He started blubbering, hands up. "Please, man, they made me. I didn't want to—" "Get out," Darius said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through Jace's panic. "Walk to the blue van at the end of the ramp. Inspector Voss is waiting for you. Go now." Jace scrambled out of the car like a panicked animal and ran. From a surveillance van parked in the shadows, Rowan could just see a figure watching. Voss. She'd seen it all. The threat, the lack of public violence from Darius, the calculated way he'd handed Jace over. Darius got into the passenger seat, his movements economical. He looked at Rowan. She was shaking. Not with fear, but with an adrenaline so potent it was making her sick. "Drive to the roof," he said. She did, her hands gripping the wheel. She parked on the exposed top deck of the garage. The fine mist of the Kingsport night hit the windshield. Eli was silent in the back, terrified. Darius got out. He went to the back door, opened it, and unbuckled Eli. "Marco will take you downstairs. He has a new car. You will have hot chocolate. I need to speak to your mother." He handed his son to the guard, who appeared, as if by magic, from the stairwell. Eli went without protest, his eyes huge. Darius closed the door, leaving them in the car. But Rowan was already getting out, her legs unsteady. She walked to the ledge of the garage, breathing in the damp, cold air, trying not to fall apart. "He threatened my son," she whispered, her back to him. "He won't again," Darius said, standing several feet away. She turned on him, her control snapping. "And you control everything, don't you? You move us like pieces, the auction, the reporters. Jace, that inspector in the van, you knew this would happen." "I anticipated it," he corrected, his voice tight. "I cannot control it. Not all of it, May." "I hate you," she said, but there was no heat in it. It was a cry of frustration. "I hate this. I hate being afraid." She looked at him. The most dangerous man in the city. The only reason she was in this mess, and the only man who seemed capable of getting her out. The contradiction was too much. She was trembling with fear, with rage, and with a sudden, undeniable, terrifying desire for the one person who was an anchor in the storm, even if he was the storm. She crossed the space between them in 2 steps. Before he could react, she fisted her hand in the lapel of his expensive jacket and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate and angry and honest. It tasted of the cold rain and the salt on her lips. It was a confession of fear and a desperate grab for connection. For 1/2 second, he was frozen in shock. Then his hand came up, not to push her away, but to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. He kissed her back. If her kiss was a spark, his was a downed power line. It was a surge of everything he held in the loneliness, the grief for his sister, the burden of control. It was a raw, bruising acknowledgement. Then, just as quickly as it began, he broke it. He gripped her shoulders, holding her at arm's length. His breathing was ragged. his eyes black with an emotion she couldn't name. "Not like this," he rasped, his forehead resting against hers. "When you are safe, when this is over, we will continue this." He took a deep, shuddering breath. Not before. He was giving her back a choice that Jace, the Raptors, and the world had tried to steal. It was an act of respect so profound, it left her more breathless than the kiss. They drove back to the safe house in silence. There, the plan formed. "The Raptors want blood," he said, pacing her living room. "We'll give them a target." The plan was simple. Feed Jace, and by extension the Raptors, false information about a massive, vulnerable money transfer at Pier 9. The next day, Rowan met with Voss. "We bugged his car," Voss said. "We heard the threat. We're grateful to Mr. Valente for his cooperation." Rowan nodded. "I'll wear a wire. I'll get Jace to confirm the Raptors' orders." She had one condition. "Jace is weak, not evil. When this is done, you use your clean slate deal. You get him out." Voss agreed. That night, Rowan tucked Eli in. "Is the harbor safe?" "Mom," he whispered. "Part of their new game." She kissed his forehead. "The tugboat's light is on. Baby, we're safe." The counterattack from the Raptors was petty and brutal. The next day, a blog post went viral. Kingsport's newest gold digger. It had photos of her from the diner, juxtaposed with the auction. It painted her as a conniving opportunist. Her phone rang. It was Sal, her old boss, his voice thick with shame. "Rowan, I can't. They threatened my family. The syndicate. They said if I keep you on the payroll..." "I'm sorry, Ro. You're fired." When Darius found out, he was apoplectic. "I will buy that dinner. I will have that man's..." "No," Rowan cut him off, her voice steel. "You don't get to fight this battle. They want to knock me down. Let me stand." The Raptor Syndicate didn't just use threats. It used spreadsheets and PR firms. A week after Rowan was fired, Hexline Ports, a previously unknown corporation, held a press conference. They announced a massive portside rebirth project, a gleaming, glass and steel redevelopment of the docks. They promised jobs, parks, and luxury condos. But the community, the one Rowan served at the harbor table, knew what it really was. It was a death warrant for their homes, their jobs, and their way of life. The city was split, those who saw the money and those who saw the eviction. Darius saw the truth. "It's a money laundering facility disguised as a skyline," he told Rowan, tossing the Hexline brochure onto her small dining table. "They're washing their dirty money through concrete." Rowan, now unemployed but not idle, felt the familiar spark of anger. "So what's your move? You own half the city council." "The council is slow. I have other files," Darius said, his voice flat. "Financial irregularities on the city controller. Photographs of the zoning commissioner. It's a dirty solution. But it's fast. I can kill this project by dawn." Rowan looked at him, at this man who wielded power like a scalpel and a hammer with equal ease. "No," she said. "No?" He looked genuinely surprised. "You kill it that way, and you're just another thug in a suit, proving that power is the only thing that matters. You'll gut their project, but you won't change the conversation. You won't save the community. You'll just put them in your debt. There's a clean way. Darius, it's just harder." "What clean way?" "You're fighting Hexline, but the people are just fighting to be heard." Rowan made a call. Not to Voss, not to Darius. She reached out to Mira Quill, an independent podcaster whose show Kingsport Underside had a small but fiercely loyal following. They met in a crowded coffee shop. Rowan didn't mention Darius by name. She didn't talk about dons or syndicates. She just talked. She was the single mother who lost her job for being in the wrong place. She was the kitchen manager who saw the fear in the eyes of the people who relied on the harbor table. People who were about to be redeveloped out of existence. "I'm not a victim," she told Mira, the microphone between them. "I'm just the first person they tried to silence." The podcast went live that night. It gave a face to the abstract fight. The next battle was the community board meeting. Hexline was there, With their slick lawyers, Darius attended, and he sat in the front row. When Rowan walked in, he stood up, and he held out his hand for her. In front of the council, the reporters, and the entire neighborhood, she took it. They sat together, a public declaration, not a Don and his mistress, but a power couple, a team. When a Hexline lawyer tried to dismiss the community's fears, Darius leaned into the microphone. "Are you suggesting the people who live here don't understand their own lives?" His hand, on the table, casually covered hers, a gesture of possession, protection, and partnership. The cameras flashed. The energy in the room shifted. They hadn't said a word, but the message was clear. Valente was on the community's side. They had bought time. That night, the air in the safe house apartment was thick, charged with the leftover adrenaline of the public fight. Eli was asleep. The city lights were distant jewels. "You were good tonight," Darius said, loosening his tie. He stood by the window, his back to her. "You command a room differently than I do." "I speak their language," Rowan said. She was still vibrating from the touch of his hand, the public claim. She walked up behind him. She didn't touch him, but he could feel her warmth. "It was for show," she whispered, her voice uncertain. He turned slowly. His eyes were dark, all pretense stripped away. Was it? He didn't move toward her. He waited, giving her the space and the power. It was her decision to close the final inch. She raised a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and laid it flat on his chest, through the fine cotton of his shirt. She could feel the heavy, staggered beat of his heart. It was not calm. It was not controlled. It was as erratic as her own. "Rowan," he breathed, his voice a warning, a plea. She silenced him by rising on her toes, her other hand coming up to cup his jaw. His skin was rough with stubble, warm. She didn't kiss him. She just held him, her eyes locked on his, a silent, clear question. His hands, the ones that controlled a city, came to her waist. They were gentle, almost hesitant. His thumbs brushed her hip bones. He was giving her every opportunity to retreat. She didn't. She leaned in, her breath mingling with his, the tension that had been building since the first touch, since the kiss on the rooftop. Snapped, it melted, not in a fire, but like a thaw. When his lips finally met hers, it was not the bruising desperation of the garage, it was a discovery. It was slow and deep and profoundly relieving. He tasted like expensive whiskey and the deep, abiding loneliness she recognized in herself. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, not in passion, but as if to get closer, to erase the space. He carried her the few steps to the sofa, never breaking the kiss. There was no fumbling, no frantic undressing, just a slow, deliberate shedding of armor. His hands were respectful, learning the shape of her back, the curve of her neck. Her fingers traced the muscles in his shoulders, unknotting the tension he'd carried for years. Every touch was a question, and every responding sigh, a yes. He laid her down, and for a moment just looked at her. He was seeing all of her, the strength and the fear. He traced the line of her collarbone with one finger, his gaze following the path, his breath unsteady. When their skin finally met, it was not with friction, but with a sense of rightness, of two rough, broken edges finally fitting together. It was a connection of trust, a quiet, desperate healing in the dark. Hours later, they lay tangled in the dim light of the city. Rowan was half asleep, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, slow rhythm of his heart. He was wide awake. His hand was stroking her hair, the same repetitive, comforting motion he'd used on her son. "I don't do this," he whispered to the ceiling. "Sleep." She shifted, looking up at him. Since the explosion, I close my eyes and I see the fire. I see the car." His voice was raw, stripped of all its command. "I haven't slept more than an hour at a time in a year." Rowan sat up. She looked at this powerful man, now laid bare and vulnerable. She thought of his words to Eli, about the thunder. She thought of his pained, fractured request in her living room. She got up and went to Eli's room. She checked on her son, kissed his forehead and pulled his blanket up. Then she returned. She slid back under the covers, fitting herself against his back, wrapping an arm around his chest. She pressed her lips to his shoulder blade. "I'm here," she whispered. "It's not thunder. It's just the world shifting, making room for the quiet. You can sleep. Darius, I'm here." He didn't answer, but she felt the coiled steel in his muscles finally, agonizingly, release. His breathing deepened. His hand found hers, gripping it tightly, like a man drowning. And for the first time in a year, as the dawn broke over Kingsport Heights, the dawn slept. The morning was different. He woke with a start, disoriented, to find her watching him. A new, fragile trust sat between them. They dressed in silence, the air charged but clear. "This," he said, gesturing between them, "it's real, but it doesn't change the other thing." "I know," Rowan said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "Eli, his safety is first. It's the only thing." They were a team, but they were parents first. The Hexline Port signing ceremony was a masterpiece of corporate theater, held in a glass atrium overlooking the very harbor they intended to conquer. Rowan, wearing the crisp black uniform of a high-end caterer, felt a grim irony. Her old life as a chef, the one Jace had helped destroy, was now her cover. Voss and the BCSO had arranged her placement on the supplemental staff, providing her with a micro-thin audio transmitter. Her mission was simple: get into the private boardroom adjacent to the main hall and plant the device. She moved through the crowd, tray steady, her eyes scanning. She refilled champagne flutes, her gaze locking for a fraction of a second with Darius. He was in the front row, the perfect picture of a rival billionaire, observing the competition. As the Hexline CEO, a man with a predator's smile, stepped to the podium to begin the final signing, Rowan slipped into the service corridor. The boardroom was empty, guarded by one man. She made eye contact with Darius through the glass doors. It was time. Darius stood up, his voice, calm and powerful, cut through the CEO's opening remarks. "A truly ambitious project," Darius called out, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. The CEO froze, mid-sentence. All cameras swiveled to Darius. "So ambitious," Darius continued, walking slowly toward the stage, "that the Valente Consortium would like to pledge $5 million to a relocation fund for the families this project will displace." The room erupted. It was a declaration of war disguised as philanthropy. "In fact," Darius said, smiling at the apoplectic CEO, "why don't we auction off the naming rights to the new community center my fund will build to house them?" Every reporter, every guard, every eye was locked on the impromptu auction, the public spectacle of 2 dons fighting with their checkbooks. The guard at the boardroom door stepped away, drawn by the commotion. Rowan didn't hesitate. She slipped inside the empty room. It was dark, smelling of leather and polish. She planted the transmitter under the massive oak conference table, right where the CEO would sit. She was out in 20 seconds. Back at the safe house, the payoff was immediate. They listened, via a secure BCSO feed. As the real meeting began after the disastrous public event, the CEO and his team were furious. Rowan heard a voice she hadn't heard before, cold and precise. "Forget Valente. The transfer schedule holds. The cold wallets move tonight, authenticated from the Pier 11 terminal. The password is Isolda's Fall." Darius went rigid. Isolde was his sister's name. The cruelty was a signature. "We have them," Rowan whispered, a fierce, cold triumph in her veins. "We have the schedule," Darius said, his voice tight. He was already on the phone to Inspector Voss. The victory felt fragile. The tension in the apartment was a low hum that even Eli could feel. He had been quiet, coloring at the table, listening as Rowan and Darius discussed the now defunct Pier 9 decoy plan earlier that day. "Mom," he asked, not looking up from his drawing. Is Pier 9 a bad place? Rowan knelt beside his chair. What do you mean, honey? You and Mr. Darius, you sound worried about it. She took his hand, her heart aching. You know your tugboat drawings. A tugboat is strong, but it never goes into the deep fog alone. It always has a team, and a light to guide the other ships. She tapped his drawing. We're just building our team. Honey, we're getting ready to turn all the lights on so no one gets lost. Eli seemed to accept this, returning to his drawing of a tugboat bravely pushing a massive container ship. The good news from the BCSO died an hour later. Darius met Voss in the lobby. He returned to the apartment, his face a mask of cold fury. There's a leak, he said, no preamble. What Voss? No, not her, me. He paced the room, a caged panther. Voss confirmed the data. Then she called back. Her surveillance team on Pier 11 just reported a full sweep. The Raptors cleaned it out an hour ago. They knew we were listening. They knew she was moving on them. Rowan felt the blood drain from her face. But they only knew because of the bug. They knew after we heard them. No, Darius said, his eyes hard. They were moving before the bug was even in place. The entire signing was a trap to feed us that information. To make us think we heard a secret, they wanted us to send the BCSO to Pier 11. A leak, she whispered, inside your organization. He's been one step ahead since the diner, Darius growled. He knew about the park. He knew about the auction. He knew about Jace. The paranoia was suffocating. Darius insisted Eli be moved immediately, not to another safe house, but out of the city entirely, to a private compound he owned upstate. Rowan agreed, her hands shaking as she packed Eli's small bag. While Darius finalized the high-level transport, she went to the garage to check the armored car they'd been using, a new, nervous habit. She ran her hand along the undercarriage, just as she'd seen Darius's guards do. Her fingers brushed a small, cold, rubberized object held by a magnet. It was a simple, quarter-sized GPS tracker. She didn't need to guess. It was cheap, sloppy, and desperate. It was Jace. She stormed back into the apartment, holding the tracker between her thumb and forefinger as if it were toxic. They are not just in your organization. Darius, they are on my car. His eyes went black. I'm moving him tonight. Yes, Rowan said. Her voice didn't shake. It was terrifyingly calm. Take Eli. Get him safe. Use your planes, your helicopters. I don't care. Get him out of the city. He stopped, seeing the look on her face. Our plan was to move you both. No. She closed her fist around the tracker. I'm not going. They put their hands on my son. They used his father to blackmail me. They tried to burn down my kitchen. I am done running. I am staying. And I am going to stand right next to you when we finish this. He saw the woman from the diner, the one who wasn't afraid to slap a Dawn. He saw the partner who had healed him. He nodded once. A binding agreement. The alliance was sealed in iron. When this is over, he said, his voice rough. She met his gaze, the promise of a future, a tiny, fierce light in the oppressive dark. When this is over, she replied, we are going to cook that dinner, in a real kitchen, no guards. A promise, he said. The leak wasn't just a leak, it was a hemorrhage, and it was coming from the heart of the Valente Consortium. Darius, Rowan, and his most trusted security head, Marco, locked themselves in the safe house. They were the only 3 people who knew about the tracker, the decoy, and the plan to move Eli. Who else knew the route? Darius's voice was a low, lethal hum. Who else saw the transport schedule? Only him, Marco said, his face pale. The only other person who signed off on the security budget for this was Silas. The name landed like a stone. Silas Edge, Darius's financial advisor for 15 years, the man who had helped him build the legitimate side of the consortium, the man who had sat with him at his sister's funeral. Silas, Darius repeated, the word tasting like ash. He picked up his phone. He's at the transport point. He's overseeing the handoff. He's with Eli right now. The convoy, 2 black sedans designed to look like a simple family trip to a summer camp, was crossing the Kingsport Bridge. Silas Edge was in the lead car. Eli was in the second car with two of Darius's guards. Silas's car suddenly developed engine trouble. It pulled to the side, blocking one lane. As traffic slowed, a staged accident involving a bread truck and a tow truck boxed in the second sedan. It was a perfect, bloodless trap. Men from the truck, Raptor operatives, stepped out, but they didn't count on Eli. The 7-year-old, sitting in the back, saw the men approaching. He saw the guard in the front seat's eyes go wide. He didn't wait. He remembered the drill. "What's Mom's favorite boat?" he yelled at the guard. The guard, confused, said, "What kid? Stay down." It was the wrong answer. Eli didn't scream, "Help!" He screamed, "Fire, fire," at the top of his lungs. He jammed his small sneaker into the door's manual lock, popping it, and threw himself out of the car, just as Rowan had taught him. He didn't run toward the chaos. He ran away, into the crowd of pedestrians on the bridge's walkway. He ducked into the first open door he found on the other side, a small, dusty, second-hand bookstore. He ran behind the counter, terrifying the elderly owner, grabbed the landline, and dialed the number his mother had made him memorize. Darius's phone rang. His heart stopped when he saw the number. "Eli, where are you?" "The bookstore." Eli's voice was high and thin, but he wasn't crying. "The men. They were wrong. The guard was wrong. I'm at the bookstore. The sign is green." Rowan, grabbing the phone, heard it all. She was already out the door. Darius and Rowan arrived in 3 minutes, their car screaming to a halt, blocking traffic. They weren't a Dawn and a victim. They were two parents. They stormed the bookstore. Eli was behind the counter, clutching a copy of Treasure Island. Darius swept him up, his hands checking his son for any injury. His relief so profound it was almost violent. Rowan held him, burying her face in his hair, breathing in his scent. "The tugboat," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You were the tugboat." They were gone before the first sirens, sparked by the kidnapping on the bridge, arrived. This time, Eli wasn't taken to a safe house. He was taken to Ardent House, a fortified community center in a neighborhood Darius owned completely. The Raptors, having lost their prize, unleashed their other weapon. That afternoon, a video hit the web. It was grainy, dark, and showed Darius Valenti seemingly meeting with the Hexline CEO. The audio was a deep fake, but a good one. "I don't care about the community," Darius's voice said. "Burn them out. I want that land. I want it all." The city, already on edge, began to turn. The politician who had shaken Darius's hand at the auction was now demanding an investigation. Mira Quill's podcast feed lit up. She worked through the night, interviewing audio experts, cross-referencing Darius's public statements. Her new episode, released at dawn, was a clinical takedown of the video's inconsistencies. "This isn't just a fake," Mira's voice told the city. "It's an act of war. The question is, who are they trying to scare?" It was almost enough, but the damage was done. Inspector Voss called, her voice strained. "Darius, the BCSO is pulling back. The public is panicked. They think you are the problem. We can't be seen to be working with you. This operation is suspended, effective immediately." Darius hung up. He stood in the operations room at Ardent House, a fortress of his own making, and he looked at the map of Pier 11. "Voss is out," he said. "The law is out." Rowan watched him. The man who had slept in her arms was gone. The Dawn was back, his eyes flat and cold. "Silas, he said, his voice dropping an octave. "He betrayed me. He betrayed my sister. He put his hands on my son. The law won't touch him, so I will." He picked up his phone. "I'm going to do this the dirty way. I'm going to burn Pier 11 to the ground, with them in it." "No." He turned. Rowan stood in the doorway, her face pale but her spine made of steel. "You can't," she said. "They just tried to take your son. Rowan, they used my dead sister's name. This is my line." "And this is mine," she shot back, walking right up to him. "You promised me. You promised me a clean path. You told my son a story about the thunder. You promised him you were the quiet. You promised yourself." She grabbed the front of his shirt. "You do this. You do it their way. And you lose. You lose me. You lose him. You lose yourself." He stared at her, the rage warring with the truth. She was the only person in the world who could say this to him. She saw the crack in his armor, the agony of his choice. She didn't soften, she just held on, anchoring him. Then she kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a short, hard, brutal reminder, a nail, fixing him to the moment, to her. He broke away, his breath ragged. He slammed his fist on the table, a single, violent crack. Then the rage was gone, leaving only a cold, focused intellect. "You're right," he said, "but they're still moving. That Pier 11 data was a trap. So where is the real transfer?" The answer came from Marco, who burst in. The leak wasn't just Silas. It was the calendar. He was trading in Valente's stock, shorting it. But the trades were being authenticated from the old terminal at the harbor table. Rowan looked at the map. Not Pier 11, the harbor table. It's the perfect cover. Our kitchen, the real cold wallets. They're moving them right under our feet. Just then, the security door buzzed. It was Silas Edge, alone, unarmed. He walked in, his hands shaking, his expensive suit rumpled. He fell to his knees in front of Darius. "Darius, please," he sobbed. "They made me. They had my wife. They threatened my children. I did what I had to. It's Cade. Cade Raptor. He's moving the wallets right now. From Pier 11. He was still selling the lie. Rowan looked at him, at this man begging for his life. She saw the alligator skin shoes, immaculate, and on the left heel, she saw a small, wet, black smear. It was not mud. It was the specific, viscous, iridescent oil she'd seen in the alley behind her kitchen, leaking from the old refrigeration units. It was the smell of the port. "Pier 11, Rowan said, her voice full of false sympathy. "You just came from there. It must have been terrifying." "It was," Silas wept. "A war zone." "Then you can be our guide," Rowan said, helping him to his feet, her touch firm. "You're the only one who knows the layout. You have to lead us. Silas, show us the way." Darius, catching her look, understood. He played along. "Yes, Silas, show us the way." The refrigerated truck from the harbor table, the one Rowan had used to save the kitchen's food, rumbled down the wet, narrow alley behind the warehouse. The rain hammered the roof, a perfect percussion for the war they were about to start. Rowan was driving. Her hands were steady, her focus absolute. This was her kitchen, her territory. In the passenger seat, Silas Edge, the traitor, was a trembling, weeping mass in a $5,000 suit. He was their Judas goat, forced to lead them into the heart of his own betrayal. "We're approaching the North Bay," Rowan spoke, her voice low and even, into the tiny microphone clipped to her collar. "He's taking the bait." "I see you," Darius's voice crackled, barely audible, in her earpiece. "I am in position." He was already in the high steel rafters of the mezzanine, a shadow among shadows, looking down on the loading dock that connected to the kitchen's cold storage. Marco was at the south exit. Voss and the BCSO, brought back into the fold by the irrefutable proof of the tracker and the promise of a clean arrest, were in a full media blackout 2 blocks away, waiting for the signal. Rowan killed the engine. The alley went dark and silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the storm. "We're here, Silas," she said, her voice hard. "Get up, show us." Silas, sobbing, practically fell out of the truck. He led them through a heavy steel door, fumbling with the key card. The air inside was chilled. This wasn't just a kitchen pantry, it was the nerve center. The main cold storage room had been cleared of food. In the center, under the glare of 2 harsh halogen work lights, stood 3 men around a folding table. It was covered in laptops, cabling, and the small, metallic bricks of hardware, cold wallets. A man turned as they entered. He wasn't a thug. He wore an expensive, dark turtleneck and had the quiet, academic look of a venture capitalist, but his eyes were reptilian, empty of everything but ambition. This was Cade Raptor. "Silas," Cade said, his voice soft, almost disappointed. "You were sloppy, and you brought guests." "Cade," Darius's voice boomed from the darkness above. A heavy-duty spotlight, one of the kitchen's own, snapped on, pinning Cade in its beam. Cade didn't even flinch. He looked up, his eyes adjusting, scanning the rafters. Darius Valente, I wondered if you'd have the stomach to show up, or would you just send your new pet? It's over, Cade, Darius said. He stepped into the light, unarmed, his hands loose at his sides. BCSO has the building surrounded. Cade laughed, a dry, humorless sound. BCSO, they ran. Darius, I saw the news. They're terrified of you, and they're terrified of me. It's just you, alone, with no guns. How utterly disappointing. He raised a small remote. You really shouldn't have, he said, and clicked it. The two work lights and the main power died, plunging the massive warehouse into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only sound was the rain, now a violent roar and the drip of water from a leaky pipe. Now, Rowan whispered into her mic. She wasn't near Cade. She was by the main circuit panel, next to the exit. She threw 3 heavy, industrial breakers, one after the other. It was not a light, it was an assault. 3 massive, high-sodium vapor security lamps, the ones she'd had installed on the kitchen's exterior, blasted the room with a blinding, agonizing, white-hot glare. They were aimed not at the ceiling, but at the center of the room. Cade and his 2 operatives cried out, hands flying to their faces, their retinas seared. They were completely blind. Voss, we are going, Rowan yelled into the mic. The trap is lit. In the blinding chaos, Darius and Marco were already moving, not toward the men, but toward the exits. They slammed the heavy roll-top doors shut, throwing the manual deadbolts. A series of heavy clangs echoed through the space. They weren't assaulting, they were containing. They were locking the rats in. Darius walked calmly into the center of the light, his eyes already adjusted. Cade was blinking furiously, his vision non-existent. You were always arrogant, Cade, Darius said, his voice carrying over the storm. You just had to use my sister's name, didn't you? Zolda, Cade sneered, his voice raw, trying to pinpoint Darius's location. She was a mistake. The bomb was for you, but she burned just the same. Thank you, Darius said, his voice flat. Cade froze. What? Darius nodded to Silas, who was cowering near the door. He said thank you for the confession. Confession, Cade spat. To who you? To Mira Quill, Darius said. And the entire city. The microphone we planted in Silas's tie. It's been live streaming for the last 10 minutes. She burned just the same. A powerful soundbite. I'm sure it will trend. Cade's face, finally visible, contorted. The trap wasn't the light. The trap was his own ego. He roared, a sound of pure animal rage, and he lunged not at the sound of Darius, but at the last person he'd seen. He grabbed Rowan. You bitch. He was fast, faster than she'd anticipated. He got a handful of her jacket, pulling her off balance. Darius didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply reached into his vest pocket and pulled something out. He tossed it onto the concrete floor between them. It spun, glinting in the harsh light, a simple gold signet ring. Cade's hand, still gripping Rowan's jacket, went rigid. He knew the ring. He stared at it. It was Isolde's, the one he had boasted of seeing in the wreckage. It was on her hand, Darius said, his voice a blade of ice. The bomb didn't destroy it. You looked right at it, and now it's yours. That was the blow, the psychological break. Cade stared at the ring, his arrogance, his composure, his entire world shattering. He let go of Rowan, his mind completely derailed by the ghost. That single second of hesitation was all it took. The main doors burst open. It wasn't a firefight. It was a clean, professional sweep. BCSO, hands in the air on your knees. Inspector Voss was first, her weapon pointed, her voice ringing with authority. Cade Raptor, you are under arrest for the murder of Isolde Valente and multiple counts of financial terrorism. Another agent snapped cuffs on a sobbing, useless Silas Edge. Silas Edge, you're under arrest for conspiracy, accessory, and a spectacular amount of wire fraud. Agents were already swarming the table, securing the cold wallets, the digital evidence, pristine. The confession, public, the Raptor syndicate was decapitated. The noise, the shouting, the flashing blue and red lights. It all seemed to fade for Rowan. The adrenaline evaporated, leaving a deep, bone-chilling tremor. She leaned back against the cold truck, her legs finally giving out. Darius walked past Voss, he walked past the agents, he walked past Cade, who was being forced to his knees, he walked straight to Rowan. He didn't say a word, he just opened his coat and enveloped her, pulling her into his chest, shielding her from the flashing lights, the chaos, and the rain. He was solid and warm, and he smelled of wool and safety. Rowan buried her face in his jacket, her hands fisting his shirt, just trying to breathe, her entire body shaking. He put his hands on either side of her face, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were dark, clear, and focused only on her. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard. "It's over. You're safe now." As the sound of the sirens outside seemed to quiet, replaced by the steady drumming of the storm, he bent his head and kissed her. It was a deep, possessive, life-affirming kiss, a promise kept, a promise of the quiet. The door to the safe house apartment opened with a quiet, exhausted click, admitting the first gray, watery light of dawn. Eli was not in his bed. He was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a thick blanket, his knees drawn up to his chest, his box of crayons and a drawing pad resting on the cushions beside him. He hadn't slept. His head snapped up, his eyes wide. He saw his mother first, her face smudged with grime, her jacket torn but her eyes clear. Then he saw Darius standing behind her, his suit rumpled, his face bruised, looking less like a Don and more like a man who had just walked through a fire and come out the other side. Eli dropped the blanket and launched himself from the sofa. He didn't make a sound. He just ran, colliding with Rowan's legs, wrapping his arms around her waist in a desperate, silent grip. He wasn't crying. He was just holding, anchoring himself. Darius watched, his chest tightening with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. He started to step back, to give them the space. "No," Eli's voice said, muffled against Rowan's stomach. He let go with one arm, his small hand reaching back, grasping at the air until it found Darius's trousers. "You, too." It was a command, spoken with the absolute authority of a 7-year-old child who needed his world to be whole. Darius hesitated. Then he knelt, completing the circle. He put his arms around both of them, his large hands engulfing Rowan's back as she held their son. Eli squeezed tightly and safely between them. Only then, secure in the embrace, did Eli let out a single, shuddering sob. "You came back," he whispered. "We're here," Rowan choked out, her own tears finally falling, her hand moving from Eli's back to Darius's neck. "The fog is gone. Baby, we're here." Later that morning, Inspector Voss arrived. She looked weary, but the grim set of her mouth had been replaced by a quiet, professional satisfaction. "It's over," she said, accepting a cup of coffee from Rowan. "Cade Raptor is in federal custody. His confession, which Mira Quill's feed captured perfectly, was enough to reopen the Isolde Valente homicide investigation. With the digital wallets and Silas's testimony, the Raptor syndicate is finished." "Silas," Darius asked, his voice low. "He'll cooperate to save his own skin. He'll be in a federal prison for a very long time. As for you two." Voss looked at Rowan, then Eli. "The official threat assessment is 0. The witness protection detail is terminated. You're free to go." Rowan took a breath. The first truly easy one in weeks. And Jace Morrow. Voss sighed. "He's a minnow, not a shark. We honored the agreement. His warrants are being consolidated. He's been offered a place in a community rehabilitation and work program on the other side of the country. He won't be coming back to Kingsport Heights." The leverage was gone. His path was clean, but it was his to walk. The next day, Darius Valente held a press conference. He announced that he was dissolving the Valente Consortium, the logistical networks, the gray market holdings, the machinery of his family's dark legacy. All of it was being liquidated. In its place, he was establishing the Kingsport Rebirth Fund, a transparent foundation dedicated to the port's sustainable redevelopment. His first act, he announced, was to transfer the seized Hexline assets directly to a community trust, managed by the Harbor Table. His second was to offer a job, to ensure this fund remains accountable to the people, he said, the cameras flashing. I have asked Mira Quill to join as its first public oversight advisor. That night, the safe house was quiet. The guards were gone. The armored sedans were gone. It was just an apartment. When Darius arrived, he knocked. Rowan opened the door. He was met with the smell of garlic, white wine, and roasting tomatoes. She was in the tiny kitchen, a dusting of flour on her cheek, her hair tied up. She was making seafood pasta from scratch. A $2 bottle of red wine was breathing on the counter, next to 2 chipped enamel plates. The promise, she said, her smile soft. Simple. The plates are chipped and the wine is cheap, but it's ours. It's perfect, he said, his voice thick. They ate at the small table, the one Eli used for his homework. Eli himself was on the floor, intensely focused on a new drawing. When they finished, he presented it. It was not just one tugboat, it was a large tugboat, pulling a smaller one, with a tiny, smiling person at the helm. Underneath, in shaky, 7-year-old letters, he had written, "Family stays." Rowan, her heart too full to speak, took Eli to his room. She tucked him in, and for the first time, he fell asleep in seconds, his breathing deep and peaceful. When she returned, Darius was standing by the window, watching the lights of the harbor. He turned as she approached. I've spent my life building a fortress, he said quietly, but it was always empty. It was never a harbor. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a velvet box. He pulled out a simple, dark band of metal. It was heavy, imperfect, forged, with the patina of age and salt. It's not a diamond, he said, his voice rough. It's iron, from one of the original harbor anchors at Pier 7. It held for 100 years. It survived every storm. He didn't hold it out. He knelt. On the cheap beige carpet of the safe house, the Dawn of Kingsport Heights went to one knee. I don't want to be your protector. Rowan, I don't want to be your boss. I am asking if you will let me be your anchor. Will you let me be your home? Tears were streaming down Rowan's face, leaving clean tracks in the flour. She nodded, unable to speak. Yes, she finally whispered. He slid the heavy, cool ring onto her finger. It was a perfect, weighty fit. She laughed, a sound that was half a sob. Yes, on one condition. He looked up at her, still on his knee. Every night, she said, her voice shaking but her gaze firm. Every night you can't sleep. Every night the thunder comes. You have to ask me. You have to say the words. He understood. He rose, pulling her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. I will, he promised. Much later, they were on the sofa, the city lights blurred by a soft rain. Eli was sleeping. Rowan was leaning against Darius, her head on his shoulder, his arms securely around her. His eyes were closed. She felt him tense, a tremor, the ghost of a nightmare. His breathing hitched. He opened his eyes, the old panic flickering. He looked at her. He saw the ring on her hand. He saw the safety in her eyes. The panic faded, replaced by the vulnerability she alone was allowed to see. His voice was a low, rough whisper. The words that had once been his wound were now his salvation. Stay until I fall asleep. Rowan smiled, kissing his temple. I'm not going anywhere. She stayed, and in the apartment high above the harbor, he slept. The storm was over. The anchor held. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts. Subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.